Hi, guys. Welcome to another Monday night study. We're continuing our study in the Ezra Apocalypse today. And then we'll have a Q&A afterwards. We've been really busy working on some new scrolls, and so those we'll be able to talk about here in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. So let's get started. Last week, I think we kind of skipped ahead and we looked at the chapter on the sacred books. And so we saw basically that in Ezra's time period, the Old Testament canon was closed. And I think that's really important for us to note, because sometimes, well, a lot of times on YouTube anyway, and other places, you'll hear people say that such and such thing was removed from the canon. Well, the Old Testament canon in the 66 books form, 39 in the Old Testament, 27 in the New, is exactly the way the Holy Spirit had planned it to be. Nothing was removed per se. So we learned that from the Ezra Apocalypse, that the public canon, which is the Old Testament, was sealed at 39 books. They count it as 24 because they count things differently. Like the 12 minor prophets, we count as 12 books. They count as one, just called the 12. And if you think about it, something like Obadiah being 13 verses, that's pretty much a chapter rather than a book. But anyway, so that's an interesting story there. That doesn't mean we don't read the Apocrypha, the Dead Sea Scrolls, other things. They're just not included in the canon. So that's led to a lot of confusion, because you'll get some people that'll read anything, including Gnostic works, think they're real, and then just go off the deep end with it. And then you'll have other churches that won't read anything outside the Bible. And that's a big mistake also. So anyway, that was an interesting study. So how that developed. And in the process of doing that, we learned that there were supposed to be, at least in his time period, the canon was sealed. It's 39 books in the Old Testament, but there were an additional 70 books that the wise study. So this would be the foundation of the school of the prophets. We didn't have a list really from that. I just speculated based on, in the Old Testament, there were places that talk about different books. So anyway, that's as far as that chapter goes on that, but that's just something to remember when we run into other scrolls that do have lists of books. We can begin to put things together. So tonight we want to look at Ezra Apocalypse, and we're going to look at chapter 13. And this is the prophecy about the Messiah, and one of the prophecies about the Messiah's coming back, and then the Battle of Armageddon and those kind of stuff. But this is more symbolic, more dreamlike. Same basic idea. So the Messiah is a man coming out of the sea. So let's just read this here. It's a little long, but it's an interesting read. Some twists in it. It says, after 7 days, I saw in a vision in the night, so a dream, I saw a great wind arise in the sea, that it stirred up all of its waves. And the wind brought up from the midst of the sea, as it were, the form of a man. And I watched as this man flew in the clouds of heaven, and wherever he turned his face to look, everything before his face trembled. So very powerful being. And wherever rather, his voice went out, all who heard his voice melted away as wax melts a furnace. Kind of reminds me, in the New Testament, I think there's two places it talks about the Lord coming back, and the fire from his, or the light from his face and the fire from his tongue destroys the enemies. Same kind of symbolism here. After this, I saw that there were gathered together an innumerable multitude of men from the four winds of heaven to fight the man that came up out of the sea. So if you think about this, this would be the Battle of Armageddon. This would be the Messiah coming back, and then all kingdoms of the earth basically turn against that. It doesn't mean every single person does, but the vast majority, the entire world. There's probably people from every single nation that want to fight against him. And there's probably a few people in every nation that don't want to fight against him. But that's the situation we're having here. So we call this the Battle of Armageddon, the last battle, the battle against the Messiah when he comes. I saw that he cut out for himself a lofty mountain and flew and stood upon it. This kind of reminds me of Daniel's vision with the statue and then the 10 toes. And then it says there was a large rock, a mountain cut without hands. And it came and smashed the statue, destroyed it, ground it to powder. The dust just blew away and it ceased to exist. And that rock or boulder cut out without human hands kind of expanded, filled, became a vast mountain, or a kingdom is what that would symbolize. It became a kingdom and then filled the earth, and it was an eternal kingdom. So we're talking about the messianic reign, the millennial reign. So this is the same idea here. He appears, and then he creates this mountain, this empire, where nothing can touch him. So he cut out for himself, it's not human hands, but he created this empire. He cut out for himself a lofty mountain and flew and stood upon it. But I sought to see the region or the place where the mountain had been cut out, but I could not. That's an interesting thing, just to think, where did the kingdom come from? Try to look beyond it, where it started. And this could be symbolic also of the New Jerusalem. Where does it come from? If it's already a city that's coming to earth, you might look to try to see where it's at, but it's from so far away you couldn't see it. After this, I saw all who were gathered together to fight with him. All of those people were in great fear, yet they dared to fight. When he saw the violent multitude that came, let me run it up here, he did not lift his hand, neither did he hold a spear or any of all of the weapons of war. He didn't fight as a human would. Instead, he says, I saw how he sent out of his mouth only, and he was shooting forth glowing coals of a storm. So fire coming out from his lips, from his face, from his countenance, waves of fire, and then glowing coals in a storm. That sounds like hail on fire coming down. So they fell upon the violent multitude that was prepared to fight, and it burned all of them up, so that suddenly nothing was left of that multitude of men without number, only the dust of the ashes and the smell of smoke. So that's pretty interesting. The Lord, in other words, could just in a second, and it's all over. That's the God we serve. I saw this and was amazed. After this, the man came down from the mountain, and he called to basically a peaceful multitude of men. Many men drew close to him. Some of them were glad, some were sad, some were bound, and some brought those who were to be offered. So that's pretty interesting. This is the same concept of after the Battle of Armageddon. The Messiah sets up a kingdom, and everyone comes, but there's still a battle, or not a battle, but a judgment of sheep and goats. So that's what is beginning to happen here. So he's seeing this, and then he says, I got so agitated, I woke myself up. So that was the whole vision. He said, I petitioned the Most High, he says, you have shown your servant these wonders from the beginning, and while I am not worthy, you have esteemed me worthy to receive this petition. Now reveal to me further the interpretation of this vision, for it looks like those who survive in those days suffer greatly, but those who do not survive suffer more. Not exactly, but that's what it looked like in the vision. Because those who do not survive will be grieved over what comes upon those who survive in the last days, those who live to see it. So in other words, what he's saying, it would be better to die before any of this happens. Not the guys that are left, but before the great battle happens. Woe to those who survive, because they may see great perils and distresses that these visions show. Well, granted, you don't want to be in the tribulation period. What you want is to go in the rapture. However, if you miss the rapture, it would be better for you to make it through the tribulation period and then be allowed to enter the kingdom. So that's the best that we can do on that. It says, woe to those who survive, because they must see the great perils and the distress that these visions show. It would be better to stand in peril and see these things come to pass rather than pass away as a cloud from the world and not see what happens at the consummation of the times. So he seems to be like almost double thinking. It'd be better to not be there, but kind of sort of what I've said if he knew about the rapture. But he wants the interpretation of this because it's a very ominous vision. He answered and said, I will tell you the interpretation of your vision and will also reveal the answers to your questions. This is the meaning of the people that you asked about, those who survive and those who do not. In that dangerous time, he will protect those who have works and faith towards the Most High, the Mighty One. Therefore, those who survive are more blessed than those who die. So this is interesting. We know in the tribulation period, a lot of people are going to be slaughtered. We know that for the first second, the church is taken in the rapture. And then for the second after that, there actually are no believers. But when people have heard the gospel before, who haven't believed it, then see the rapture and see all the other prophecies beginning to take place, they're the ones that are going to immediately become saved or accept the Lord. So there's going to be a great multitude. And we see this in Revelation, the great multitude that happens. And then there's the 144,000, there's the 2 witnesses. There's a lot of other subgroups. So there's a lot of people that do that. So a lot of people might look at this and think, well, we're saved by grace through faith, and that's not of works. And this says it's a dangerous time. He will protect those who have works and faith towards the Most High, the Mighty One. So the Most High would be God the Father, the Mighty One would be the Messiah. But in this case, we're not talking about saving yourself through works or perfecting your salvation through works. We're talking about it's a dangerous time when people try to kill you. If you're smart and you do things a certain way, you will survive. The Lord will protect you to a point, but if you're stupid and you just walk out in front of a bus, for instance, you will get run over. So because of their works and because of their faith, the works that they do is because of their faith, if that makes sense. If they actually believed the Antichrist was a great guy and sided with him, they wouldn't be worrying about anything until the Messiah comes. Those that know who the Antichrist is, that he's evil, will try to get away from him. And some will be successful if they're smart enough to figure out how to do it. So that's the works we're talking about, not works for salvation. Okay, and then it says, this is the interpretation of your vision. The man coming up from the heart of the sea is he whom the Most High has kept from the beginning, through whom he will deliver his creation, deliver or save his creation, and he will bring those through those who are left. So the people that are left through this great battle will actually be able to enter the kingdom. So again, the tribulation saints. So it says the firestorm that came from his breath, the breath of his mouth, and that he did not have a spear or a weapon in his hand, but still destroyed the masses coming to wage war with him, means that in the future, when the Most High is about to deliver those who dwell on the earth, a great horror will come upon them, on the inhabitants of the earth. They will plan to fight each other, city by city, people with people, kingdom with people. After all the signs I previously told you about come to pass, then my Son, be the Messiah, will be revealed, whom you saw as the man coming up. So this is pretty interesting here too. Lots of information. So when the deliverance is about ready to happen, then at that point, and this deliverance could be talking about the rapture also, because the people that follow God now would be waiting for the rapture. But in either case, as we get close to the rapture / tribulation period / second coming in that area, that's all in a 7-year period anyway. When we're getting close to that time period, people start to fragment, city with city, people with people, kingdom with kingdom. And you see this kind of stuff all the time. The entire Muslim world is pretty large. They could probably pretty easily wipe out anybody they wanted and take over if they were united together. But the fact that there are several subgroups of Muslims, and then sometimes even if you're the same technical religion, you're in one country versus another, and the other country is bad, and your country is good. So we have to fight each other. And you'll see this throughout all scriptures, way back even in the beginning, back in the Old Testament, the Lord would pit enemies against each other so that the enemies would wipe each other out and Israel wouldn't even have to fight. And this is the main thing that happens. We see the same thing in Ezekiel 38 when the battle of Gog and Magog occur, which I don't think the battle of Gog and Magog is the same thing as the battle of Armageddon. And there's some very specific reasons why, dealing with the Ezra Apocalypse, actually, and a few other places. But in either case, the same kinds of things happen. People come against Israel to destroy it. At one point in each of these battles, the Lord sends confusion to the peoples. So like one half of the army thinks the other half of the army is Israel, and vice versa. So in their attempts to destroy Israel, they destroy each other. That's the kind of thing that goes on a lot of times over and over. Let's see. So he will send the delusion among them to do that. They'll fight each other, city with city, people with people. After all the signs I previously told you come to pass. So we need to go back in the book and mark out all those signs, most of which are in scripture anyway, but there's a few extra ones. Then my Son will be revealed, who you saw coming as the man coming up out of the sea. When all the peoples hear his voice, they will all leave that battle that they were fighting. Those men without number will gather together to come and wage war with that man. So you can think about this right now. There's all these different factions of Muslims and other things too, and they're all fighting each other, all the infighting. But when something like this happens, they all stop their infighting, band together, and fight the enemy. That's why many times in our last 20, 30 years or so in the history, we've had a situation where the United States, a lot of times, has rightly said, Israel, don't get involved. If you get involved, they'll immediately stop fighting each other and they will all attack us, Israel and the United States. So that kind of a thing, because that's just the way the mentality is. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And the greatest enemy is Israel. Second greatest enemy, the great Satan, is the United States. That's Muslims, though. But this may or may not be that at that time, because this would be at the end of the tribulation period. The Babylonian mystery religion has been destroyed. The new religious system the Antichrist wants to have is set up. The 10 nations have taken the territory and the goods from the Babylonian system and used it for themselves. The mark of the beast has come and been set up. All these things are going on at that time. So that's way down in the middle of the tribulation period toward the end. So those men without number will come together, stop killing themselves or attacking themselves, and wage war with that man. But he will stand up on the top of Mount Zion. Remember, the Bible says when the Messiah comes back, his feet will touch on Mount of Olives. So that's the Mount Zion area. And Zion will come to be revealed to all, prepared and built, as you saw that the mountain that was cut without hands. So this explanation is the mountain that's cut without hands is not necessarily just the millennial kingdom, but it's the capital of the millennial kingdom, the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven. As you can see here, it's landing on Mount Zion. It actually is kind of Mount Zion, and it's already prepared and built. So it's a city we're talking about. My son will reprove those ungodly people like a storm. Reprove is probably a light word for what's going on. He will judge their wicked deeds and sentence them to a torment wherewith they are destined. As to him being like a flame, he will destroy them without effort by the law of him who has been likened unto fire. You know, in the Old Testament, like in Daniel and other places, the Ancient of Days is snow white hair, eyes of fire, and same kind of a thing here. In Enoch, you've got the picture of the burning buildings and the glowing buildings that are so hot, and things like that. So that's interesting. So that's a good picture of the second coming, the Battle of Armageddon. Not a whole lot of detail, less than what we have in Revelation. Revelation actually gives us more, but some interesting points about the New Jerusalem coming down at that point and those kind of things. Okay, and we continue on. It says, the peaceful multitude. Remember, there's a group of people that are not coming to battle because they either just don't want to come to battle or they love the Messiah or something. The tribulation saints. The peaceful multitude of men that he gathered together to himself. These are 9.5 tribes, which are led captives out of the land in the days of Josiah the king, when Shalmaneser, the king of the Assyrians, took them captive and brought them to the other side of the Euphrates River. So if you remember correctly, back in the 1st, 2nd Samuel, Kings and Chronicles, you have the basic history of Israel. And at one point they became evil. They separated after Solomon died. His son Rehoboam took the southern tribes, which are just 2.5, Judah, Benjamin, and then a half a tribe. And then the other 10.5 tribes were taken by, or actually given by the prophet to Jeroboam. But Jeroboam became pagan. The entire 10 tribes became pagan, and they were taken out in successive waves into Assyria and basically disappeared. And we have all these different theories about the 10 tribes, the lost 10 tribes. You hear that all the time. But basically, remember that there were some people in each one of the 10 tribes that decided, I don't want to be pagan, I want to serve the Lord. So they picked up and moved to Judah, the southern country. And there were also Jews, Judahites, Benjamites, and the others down living there that decided they didn't want to serve the Lord. They'd rather be pagan, and they would pick up and they moved to Israel. So there's representatives of all 12 tribes. Technically, it's 13 tribes, but all the tribes of Israel in both groups. The vast majority of the 10 tribes are in the north, and the vast majority of the 2 tribes are in the south. But that's kind of what happens. So this peaceful multitude, it says, are those people and in those days. So here's the story behind it. And I thought this was interesting. Remember also that when they were coming down and taking the people captives, there was a group of people that still lived in Israel, the northern country, that were worshipers of the Lord and believed the prophecies, and they knew what was coming. And so they picked up and left and didn't ever go into captivity. They went other places. And that's where we have the Koshin Jews. And because of that, the extra books in the canon and the other things that they have, which that story is still unfolding at the moment. So it's going to get really interesting this next year. But anyway, so there are people like that. In every case, there are people that don't really believe. They're just kind of sort of Christians, and they don't care, and you can warn them, and they don't even get that you're warning them. They just don't seem to know anything, nor do they want to know anything. Then there are other people that want to know things and will listen. And if the prophecy says this city is going to be destroyed, well, I'm moving. Why wouldn't I move? So those are the kind of works that prove you are a believer. is when things like that happen. Doesn't matter what you do, just the fact that you do something because of what you believe. That's the key. So let's see. Let's go on. So it says they decided for themselves that they would leave the multitude of the peoples and go to the inner region where no man ever dwelt. We're talking about the 10 tribes now, or representatives of them, so that they could freely worship, keep their law that they have not been able to keep in Israel. Remember, because Israel, the northern country, had went pagan, so they couldn't really follow the law of the land in that sense. So they just wanted to get out of there. They entered through the narrow passages of the Euphrates, for the Most High performed miracles for them, much like he did when they came out of Egypt. He held back the sources of the river until they had all passed over, that they might proceed to dry land. It was a long journey, taking a year and a half. So for a large group of people, a year and a half to go somewhere, crossing large rivers, I can understand that. Let's see here. So the region where they went to was called Asareth. And we'll come back to that in a minute and see if we can identify where Asareth is. It says they dwelt there until the last time. So presumably they're still dwelling there, because we haven't had the second coming, the Battle of Armageddon yet. So again, understand all these different theories of the lost tribes being in America. They're American Indians, they're Mormons, they're this, they're that. Those are all just theories from people trying to figure out these things. And all of them, except one, I guess, or most of those are fake, just guesses, or stuff totally made up by cults. So they dwelled there in Asareth till the last time. When they are about to come again, the Most High will again hold back the sources of the Euphrates River so that they may pass over. This makes me wonder if this is not connected to Revelation, when the Euphrates River dries up so the kings of the East can pass over. Somehow I don't think the kings of the East are the lost 10 tribes, but it's just kind of an interesting connection. Therefore, when you see the peaceful multitude that was gathered together, but those who survive from your people will live, and they who are found within my holy borders. Then he, that's the Messiah, destroys the violent multitude of the people, and he will protect those who remain, and will perform many miracles. So there's a lot of miracles that are going on, a lot of them during the tribulation period. We're told, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's a lot of miracles and things that happen in the last Jubilee of the age, or the last generation of the age, which begins next year, actually, in 2026. March of 2026 would be the beginning of the last 50-year period on the Essene calendar. Excuse me. So already things are changing. Things have been at a status quo for decades, where people can't get their hands on certain scrolls, things like that. That is changing rapidly now, even this year, even though it's not quite yet time. So lots of interesting things are happening. Okay, so when he destroys the violent people and he protects those who remain and performs many miracles, I then asked him, my Lord, make known to me this. Wherefore have I seen the man come up from the heart of the sea? So in other words, why? It's Old English. We need to make a new translation of this with modern English. There's just a lot of interesting things to do. Anyway, he answered me and said, just as one does not have the power to search out what is in the depths of the sea, so no one who is on earth can see my Son or those who are with him, except in that day, or at the time that is his day. So you and I can't just, pick up and go to where Messiah is at right now and talk with him. Different dimension, different, whatever you want to call it. But when he comes here, that will be different. So he wants to see where he's at, what he's doing today, to sit down and talk with him. And the answer is no, you can't just sit down and talk with the Messiah, at least not at that point while he's still living. This is the interpretation of the vision that you have seen. And then he's further instructed, and it says, these things have been revealed to you and you alone, because you have forsaken your personal things. You have devoted yourself to searching for the holy things in the law. You have sought wisdom all of your life and have called discernment your mother. This is why I have shown you these things as a reward from the Most High. After 3 days, I will speak to you again and explain to you the last marvels. So there's more things yet to come. Last 2 chapters is all about the dragon nations and how the 10 nations basically form, that kind of stuff. So that gets us up into the tribulation period, but gives us things to look at for right now also. And I did a lot of walking in that field, praising the Most High for the marvels that he had wrought at different times, because he directs the times and what comes in the times. And I sat there 3 days. So that's an amazing chapter. And I think this last part is really important for us to think about. We get so caught up with the things of life, with school, with work, with family, jobs, hobbies, things like that. Just things take a lot of time. You can't do everything that you want to do. But there are some people like him, hopefully like you and I, that will give up some of that stuff, at least for a time, whatever it takes, to be able to search the matters, to do wisdom. It's kind of proving yourself that you care about the Lord more than you care about the things of earth. We care about all of them. We have to eat, we have to exercise, we have to make money, we have to take care of our families. But this is actually more important. So somehow, or at least as important, somehow we have to juggle those together. And usually in most people's lives, the religious studies are the last one to do. And that's the opposite of him here. And the Lord was just thrilled with anybody who would give up some of those things. You don't really need extra money for the new car, for the new whatever, for the new house, for the new building. You don't really need to do other things. You can cut back on your spending. You could rearrange some things. Now, not all of us can, but if you can and you choose to do that, the Lord will be very interested in that kind of a person. That your only goal in life really is to study scrolls or scriptures, prophecies, things like that. I've gotten to be like that as I've gotten older. So the only other thing in here, we've got a lot of commentary, but I wanted to show you, this is a chart. So what is Asareth? They went somewhere, the place is called Asareth. Where is it at? And nobody seems to know, but if you break down the word Asareth, it can come out several different ways. So it could be called Mountain of Seeds, which is an idiom for another land. That seems kind of strange to say they went to another land, which we call another land. So that doesn't seem likely. Could also be, that's Azareth with a Z. Asareth would be a mountain of princesses. I'm not sure where that would be exactly either. There might be something like that, some place called the Mountain of Princesses, Mountain of Fire, Mountain of Seeds. Maybe there is some place like that we could look up on Google Maps, try to figure out where it's at. A seraph would be another way of saying that, which is the mountain of the seraph. A seraph is a fiery, angelic being. So that could be they went to a different plane, like to heaven, so to speak, or where the seraphs are at, or seraphs being fiery, maybe they went underground, where we're someplace where there's volcanoes, or the mountain of the seraph definitely sounds like a volcano of some sort, if you put that together. And then the other way of looking at it could be mountain of Saf. And Saf would be translated for Af is or Saf rather is end or end of a continuation or something like that. So in this case, a mountain of Saf is probably something like the end of the world. So if you're going from Jerusalem, the very furthest part you could go, like the tip of Africa, the North Pole up in Siberia, the Pillars of Hercules, Rock of Gibraltar, that kind of stuff. If you didn't know about the United States, United States is probably, or America's, North and South both, are about as far away as you can get. But there's a large place there. So lots of places to look for. It's evidently somewhere. But those are the possible interpretations based on the different spellings. And not that there's different spellings, but the sounds, how it could sound and how it could be spelled. Since we don't know what it really means, just take the sounds and take a guess, and then take one of these and go to places like that and possibly figure it out. But we may not figure it out until after the fact. That's one of those things, because they're hidden there for safety. So one of those things. So we'll go ahead and stop there tonight. It's an interesting study on that stuff. So basically, in this case, he sees the Messiah coming, and the kind of new information we're told is that the kingdom that he's building or bringing with him is a rock cut out without human hands, and it actually is a city that comes to earth. So it's not only the millennial kingdom in this vision, but also the New Jerusalem. So the throne room, everything like Ezekiel sees in the last 10 chapters, that whole thing for the millennial reign. So really interesting to see. So, okay, what we'll do is we'll stop there and we'll go to the chat room and see if there's any questions. It looks like there's a few here. Can you recommend a copy of the Talmud? The other one I have is a little age for editions. I don't really have a particular Talmud that I would think of. I don't know. I really don't have anything to recommend you for that. So sorry. I have read pieces of the Talmud, studied a little bit of it, but these last days I've been mainly focusing on the scrolls and things that they point to that seem to be more accurate or more worthy of study than the Talmud. So, next question. Why didn't Jesus choose from the Essenes for his apostles? They presumably would have understood that his two comings, atoning death, etc. Apostles seem to have been clueless on these matters. Well, I think it's interesting. Well, James and John were the sons of John the Baptist, not sons, were disciples of John the Baptist. John the Baptist was an Essene, so therefore they were Essenes. So you've got a representation of just about everybody among the apostles. You've got Matthew, who might have been Pharisee or whatever, but was a tax collector. So he would have been ousted, for instance. So you've got people that were scribes. Simon the Canaanite, for instance, is another one. So you've got several different groups like that. So a lot of times people wonder about that. They should have understood the two comings, things like that. Sometimes people are just not that accurate. I mean, you might go to a church that teaches prophecy, but maybe all they do is talk about the rapture, for instance, or something, and they don't ever get into the other prophecies. And very rarely will you ever have a church that teaches the Dead Sea Scroll prophecies and things like that, putting them all together, because it's just not proper tradition in America to teach something outside the Bible in church, usually. So it's just very, very rare. And that's generally a good idea, because there's a lot of garbage out there too that claims to be stuff. So anyway, you would think they would. An example of that I thought was interesting is John the Baptist. Now, John the Baptist was an Essene, and when he was put in prison before he died, he sent two of his followers. I think this is Matthew 11. He sent two of his followers to ask Jesus, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we look for another?" And I think that's normal. The Essenes taught one thing, the Pharisees taught another. It is possible the Essenes had everything except 1 or 2 points correct. I mean, it's even though your denomination seems to be the absolute best of all of them, you could still be wrong on 1 or 2 points. So you're thinking he should have started the kingdom by now, or it was it supposed to? I'm not sure. So let's ask him. It's supposed to be, like we would say, it's supposed to be a pre-trib rapture and a this and a that. But I see 10 nations, and was they supposed to come first? So he's just doing that kind of a thing. Not even doubting, but just saying, were we wrong on this one point? Is there another person coming now? Or are you the only one and you come later? Or how does that work? What's going on? And he responds by telling him, go back and tell John, the dead are raised, the lame are healed, the blind are healed, the poor have the gospel preached to them. And he goes on. And we look at that and we think, well, he's quoting from different passages in the Old Testament. Well, the part about the Messiah raising the dead is not anywhere in the Old Testament. The others are in there scattered in different places. But there's one scroll, one Dead Sea Scroll, that has a list of things that the Messiah would do when he comes. And Jesus was actually just going down the list of the scroll. And in that scroll, it mentions raising the dead. So basically, he's saying, go back and tell John that I've done everything mentioned in the scroll of the Messiah. And he will know what that means because he's probably got the thing memorized. Any prophet guy would have stuff like that memorized, So he went back and they told him about that. So it's an interesting thing. It's not that he wasn't in a scene. It's not that he was even doubting, but he's double checking. And I've said before, if Jesus were to appear right here, I'd say, excuse me, guys. And I'd say, Jesus, could you lose your salvation or no? Okay. Pre-trib rapture or okay. So what about when, I would just ask him all this stuff. I'm expecting him to say we have it right, but we may not. But if I could hear him say yes or no, that's what I would like, just to make sure. And that's, I think, what's going on there. But yeah, a lot of people are clueless. And yeah, I go to a Calvary chapel, and it's probably one of the best Calvary chapels that I've been in. But that doesn't mean that you could walk up to anybody there and say, what about the book of Enoch? What about the prophecy in chapter 50? Or what about that Dead Sea Scroll that talks about that 70-year prophecy that's supposed to be up next year? Now, granted, there's a lot of people in our church that have heard me talk about that and know about it, but most Calvaries would not know what you're talking about. So it's that kind of a thing too. So again, it goes back to what we were studying here. If you give up a lot of the little things in life that you could be doing and study more and fellowship with people and study with people, you'd be much better off, and the Lord would be happier with your kind of things. Nothing wrong with going bowling on Thursday nights, for instance. But if you didn't do that, you could be studying a little more. On the flip side, you need to do something for exercise. So it's that kind of a thing. That's a good question, though. Is the gospel of the kingdom distinct from the gospel of salvation, perhaps directly to the Jews addressing the millennial kingdom on earth as promised them? I don't think so. When you talk about the gospel, I think there's only one gospel. There was a cult that got started a ways back. I forget exactly the name, but they were teaching that there's a gospel of the Jews or gospel of Jesus or whatever, the gospel in the Gospels. And then when you get to the epistles of Paul, Paul makes mention that I said this according to my gospel. And they made a big deal of like, Paul's gospel is what we as Gentiles follow. The gospel or the stuff in the four gospels was for the Jews. And they start compartmentalizing. So it's like as Christians, you don't read the gospels. You just read Paul's epistles. And they got really weird that way. In reality, if you go back and look at the history, Paul dictated what he knew of the gospel to Luke. And then Luke interviewed other people and wrote the Gospel of Luke. So when Paul is saying it's according to my gospel, if there's anything other than the fact that he was the apostle to the Gentiles and he was teaching them those things, that's probably all it means. But if it means anything more, he's actually talking about the Gospel of Luke. That's my gospel that I dictated to Luke and he wrote it down. Whereas Peter dictated things to John Mark and he wrote that down. That's the book of Mark, or the Gospel of Mark, basically from Peter. And then whatever else Mark had put into it. So Matthew wrote his own, first in Hebrew, then in Greek. And then John wrote his own. However, he mentions that he got together with the disciples and said, here's my outline. Does anybody remember anything else? And they discussed things. And then he put other things in with his gospel. So it's really interesting if you just go back to church history and look that kind of stuff up. But as far as the gospels, I don't think there's any difference. And the gospel is how we're saved. It's by faith in Messiah without works, just simply belief. Yeah, so that's kind of things that I don't know which one of those you were talking about, but that's my 2 cents on that kind of stuff. Is it possible for Saul to have known Jesus before his conversion? He would have at least known about him. And that's one reason why he got so hostile, because it wasn't there were several messiahs running around. There was, and these are all, Eusebius gives the rest of the story or the rest of the history. But like in the book of Acts, there was the Galilean. That's an amazing story. And then there was the Egyptian guy that tried to say he's Messiah and attack the Romans. And then remember in Acts, one of the Romans said, aren't you that Egyptian that they were looking for the other day? No, that's not Paul. So there were several people like that. So Paul or Saul at that time would have said, all these things are cults, and I'm going to stamp them out because I don't want people being drifting into cults. And so that's why he attacked the church so hard. So he would have at least known about Jesus, known about the followers of the way. They're the Christian groups that are connected to the Essenes. They were both called followers of the way. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. There's a lot of history behind it. So I don't know for sure, but I think it's a good possibility. Have you found the Hebrew New Testament from Koshin? Yes. You have mentioned them in past sessions. We're actually working on some translations now. That's some of the stuff coming out this year. Very, very interesting. Does this happen before or after the 1,000-year reign? I'm not sure what it is we're talking about. But if we're talking about this text that we were just talking about, the second coming and the Battle of Armageddon and the destruction of those peoples and the descent of the New Jerusalem, those would all be at the beginning of the millennial reign. So basically right now we're waiting for the formation of 10 nations and an Antichrist to appear. There's going to be a rapture. Then there's going to be a 7-year period. There's going to be a rebuilt temple. I'm not putting things in order. I'm just running them out there. Those are the things that we could look for. The destruction of the Nile River. There's a whole bunch of little things. There's the Gog-Magog war, the destruction of Damascus. There's the Iranian-Israeli war that hasn't really started yet. The taking back of the Gaza Strip, the taking of southern Lebanon and ancient Gilead. And then there's a few other things too that are some other wars. So all that stuff is happening probably close to the tribulation period, some of that in the tribulation period, but it's all in the framework now that's beginning to happen. What is the gathering of the elect from the 4 winds? Matthew 24 and Mark 13, not the rapture. It's probably not the rapture. Yeah, I think what he's talking about there is he's come back, not to take his people up, but for the wrath to be poured out. The wrath is poured out, and then there's actually the second coming. And that the second coming is when he destroys all of the Antichrist forces and establishes a millennial reign. So I think this vision is all about him coming to do the final battle and start the millennial reign. And at that point, though, the people that are left that are in hiding, a lot of people are in hiding from the Antichrist and his forces. But the Lord apparently sends angels to gather his elect from the 4 corners of the earth and bring them back to Jerusalem. So it's not to say that there's not a rapture, or that everything about gathering people is a rapture. There are multiple things in there. It's just anything future, you're not absolutely sure if you're interpreting it right. Once it happens, we'll know, but I think that's what's going on here. So the big debate in Matthew 24 is like, is it talking about when he comes back, or is it the rapture, or is it Armageddon, or things like that? There's certain things, Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, that are concrete, but other things are not quite. I have a sneaking suspicion when we get to the Hebrew versions of the Gospels, it might be a little clearer. So we will see. There are several groups of people working on these things, so it's not going to take long to get them out. Okay, next question. Abram went to Egypt. Yeah, went to Egypt. If they were Ham's people, there could only be a few hundred years. Remember, Shem was still alive. Why then does Egypt come across as thousands and thousands of years old? Oh, okay. Basically, they have the same kind of chronology. If you look at Menetheo, the Temple of Abydos, that keeps all those records, the records basically showed 10 pre-flood kings, just like our 10 patriarchs. Different names, different set of years. So the years somehow always get garbled. Even when you take the Old Testament and run it through another language like the Septuagint, garbles the numbers. Josephus garbles the numbers. And they're all slightly different than each other. So there's no consistency. It's not like the Greeks have this certain numbering system, and the Hebrews have another one. The Greeks have like 20 or 30 different numbering systems or chronologies, and the Hebrew is all polished together. Dead Sea Scrolls agree with the Hebrew. Septuagint's quite a bit different. And so in this case with Egypt, the Temple of Abydos, the Menetheo Scrolls, and the other texts all talk about these 10 pre-flood patriarchs or kings, and then there's a flood that basically wiped everything out. And then the dynasties start with the first dynasty with what's the guy's name? I'm glitching here. Mitzrayim, the founder of Egypt. So the Egyptian dynasty, the first one begins. And then he ends up getting killed by a hippo, actually, of all things, not a war. But anyway, these things continue, and there's a lot of studies in the different dynasties of Egypt. You can actually plot them out. So the pre-flood patriarchs or kings, they have it like 30,000 years or whatever. Each king ruled, something like that. One of the church fathers said that there was basically the way the Egyptian calendar is that they counted what we would call a year, they would call a month. So even 30,000 months, would still be quite a bit different. It'd be like 3,000 years, and nobody ever ruled 3,000 years. So it's still off, but it's an interesting thing. There's something with the chronologies back then. But anyway, when you look at, and we did this in our book, Ancient Post-Flood History. If you look at Jasher, Josephus, and Genesis, you can figure out from the flood, when they came out of the boat the year later, that was the year 1657. So when they came out, 1656 was the year of the flood. They were in there 1 year, they came out. And then you can catalog it all the way down to Abraham, so many years. And then the Exodus comes out so many years later. So the difference between them, between the flood and the Exodus, is 792 years, according to the old Hebrew texts. Then if you go back and you realize that the first dynasty is ruling from Memphis, the second dynasty is created by a guy named Merikayan who comes down from Assyria. Long story, interesting story. It's how the pharaohs got started. But anyway, he creates a dynasty ruling from Elephantine. So that's where we have Upper and Lower Egypts. So if you take the chronologies of the first 6 or 8 dynasties, which is the Old Kingdom, and you put them side by side instead of on top of each other, but side by side, it actually fits very nicely inside of 792 years to the flood. So we calculated that out, and there's explanations in the Temple of Abydos about who the Pharaoh was, the longest ruling Pharaoh, the Pharaoh of the Exodus, things like that. There's actually rocks or monuments about Pharaoh's army dying in a whirlpool, and just different things like that. There's actually quite a bit of evidence to kind of pull those back together. So yeah, it's the same thing happened with the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, in the book of Enoch and Jubilees that we have through the Ethiopic canon. Numbers got garbled. Every time we run it through a translation, the numbers get garbled. I don't understand why. A donkey is a donkey, a cat is a cat, 100 years is 100 years. It shouldn't be that hard, but somehow they always get garbled. Super chat, $5. Thank you for that, and thank you for all of you who are members, who are doing the other studies with us. And members get different, PDFs and things like that, and you guys get to help us out. And then a lot of you donate through PayPal or GiveSendGo, buy the books. A lot of you are doing studies in your own churches with our books, and so I just thank you for all of that and letting us know what you're doing. It really helps us to know that we're really doing good with the Lord and with His stuff. So, question: does the Apocrypha make a case for Mary's sinlessness and assumption into heaven, along with the doctrine of purgatory, as per Catholicism? Thank you. It does not. One of the things, Mary's sinlessness wouldn't be in there at all anyway. There is a place, I think it's in 2nd Maccabees chapter 12, where it talks about basically paying a temple for a sacrifice on behalf of the dead. And the Catholics will use that to say that they're paying to get their loved ones out of purgatory. And it might sound like that at first in chapter 12. The situation, if you read chapter 12 carefully, what it's talking about is there was a group of Jews that went down somewhere. They were ambushed, and half of them were killed, and the other half escaped perfectly unharmed. When they went to bury the dead, they found out that the people that had been killed actually were idolaters. Each one of them had some little idol in their pockets. So it was like the Lord allowed the idolaters to get killed, and the faithful worshipers were protected. And so there is a law of Moses that said if you find a dead body and you're not sure who killed it, or if you find idol type stuff, you're supposed to destroy it. But if you're not sure of what's going on or who did it, if you knew who did it, you'd put him to death, the murderer or whatever. But if you're not sure of this stuff and you can't figure out what exactly happened because everybody's dead, then you send money to the temple, and they will use the money to buy a sacrifice, and you'll sacrifice on behalf of the evil that happened. Just as it's a sacrifice, so that you're basically saying, this is what happened. We were not a part of it. We can't figure out what happened. So we're just doing a sacrifice to ask the Lord to cleanse everything. That's part of the law of Moses. So that's what was going on at that particular place. They were sending an offering to do a sacrifice on behalf of the dead people, not for them, but because they're dead people and something bad happened. And we don't really know who the source was, who made the idols, if there's more of them out there. We don't know anything, but our hands are clean. So that's what's going on. But the Catholics then will take that and turn it around and say, no, it was anciently a normal practice for people to do a Jewish temple sacrifice to get their loved ones out of purgatory, which is really weird. If you look at the early church fathers, like Origen and several of the guys, they will make mention that the first idea of a purgatory, instead of dying and going to either hell or heaven, which is the choice, you go to one of two places. And they all said that. But one of the cults, one of the Gnostic cults, started teaching a place called the pleroma, I think is what it's called in that language. But it was an idea of instead of a heaven or a hell, which is a done deal, this was a place where you could purge yourself of your animal nature and become more like a god. And then you could go on to the other realm where the gods are. So that was a Gnostic teaching, and it started creeping in. But the church fathers all said this is a Gnostic teaching. We all know it's not true. There's only two places you go. It's really specific. So they all said that kind of stuff. Origen also mentioned the idea of Mary being venerated because she's an ever virgin. And he said that some people had started doing that because there is a cult that wants to make her into a goddess because it would fit better with their people. And it's just stuff that was happening. And he went on to say, we all know she had other children. She's married to Joseph. She's a wonderful woman. All the people on the planet will always call her blessed throughout all time because she's the mother of the Messiah. But she's not sinless, and she was not an ever virgin, and she's not a goddess. And we do not pray to her. So they all said stuff like that. So anyway, hope that helps. That's one of the reasons why we're Protestants. We protest those doctrines by the Catholic Church. Now you can read the New Testament and get something wrong and have a wrong theology because you misunderstood a scripture. But these are just like extra things over the centuries that kept popping up. Last week in chapter 14, verse 44, you wrote 94 books. My King James 1611 says 204 books. Do you know why there'd be a difference? Let me check real quick. I'm not sure. I was using a Eastern version of the text, not the one that came with the King James, so that might have a difference. But it's supposed to be 70 books plus the 39. No, I'm sorry, not 39. It would be 24, the way they count it. 24 plus 70 should be, 94. So yeah, this version at least has 94. If you've got 204, that's interesting. So 204 minus 24 would be 180. Wow. That's interesting. What might be going on is there might have been 70 in his day, and by the time they put together the King James 1611, they might have realized the other stuff from the Dead Sea Scrolls, although I don't know that they would have had access to all of that. So it's hard to tell. Either way, we can take from it, there's at least 70, maybe more. I always figured there's more because that would have been what he would have taken. Remember, he was taking the Hebrew and making Aramaic Targums out of them. And if that's all he had at the time, that's back in Ezra's time at 450 BC. Going forward, there's a lot more scrolls, Dead Sea Scrolls, things like that. So I would assume there would be more. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that. 204. Well, actually, I guess it doesn't make much difference to us. The main thing is to be looking for extra biblical books mentioned in the Bible or in the scrolls and see what we come up with. My husband has leukemia and will be receiving stem cell transplant in his DNA, and blood type will be altered to donor stem cells. Okay. Seems like Nephilim medicine. Stem cells, I mean, it's going that direction, but I would not worry about that per se. Basically, what you're talking about, I think what you're talking about, or should be, you're getting stem cells rather, which are the type of cells that can change into any other kind of cell. So the cells in the eye won't work for blood or vice versa, but a stem cell can be made into either one of those. So it's the stem cells would be able to go somewhere and fix the problems of things that won't regenerate. So if he's getting stem cells from another human being, that shouldn't really be Nephilim in that sense. It's the same kind of technology, but it's not mixing him with stem cells from a pig or something else that might have adverse effects. So I wouldn't think that would be something to worry about. It's interesting that they can do that. They're doing a lot more with stem cells now. How do 13, 24, 33, and 38 relate to the sheep and the goats judgment in Daniel 12? Oh, what we just went through. I don't know that it does, but it sounds like it does to me. It's the idea that, well, first he destroys all the people that came against him. Then he gathers all the ones that are pious or that love him together, or gathers all of them, basically. And so that whole thing could be a sheep and a goats nation, because he's destroying the nations that came against him and the other people that he didn't. So it's judgment of nations, but individuals actually are there. So if you are part of Russia, for instance, you may not want to attack Israel. And I would think that the Lord would supernaturally protect you. So, I mean, if that was going on when the fire comes down, because it says 5/6 of each of the nations are destroyed. And I would assume that would mean leaving the people that would not want to attack. So I don't know that it is, but it just sounds like it. It's that kind of a thing, at least. Question: is God holding back the Euphrates then the same as the Euphrates being dried up for the kings of the East, meaning the kings of the East are those northern exiles, not the Chinese as we usually think? I don't think so. I think it's two separate things. It sure sounds like it might be in the text, but I think the kings of the East would almost have to be like Chinese or Iran or something like that to the East, some of those things. But we do have the same kind of a thing going on for them. And then also remember in Revelation, the Euphrates dries up and we have the four, well, I guess it could be different, but the four angels that are under the Euphrates River are let loose to wreak havoc too. So I personally don't think they're the same, but I'm not sure. I have a pastor friend whose 18-year-old daughter got pregnant out of wedlock. I have a few of those too, pastor friends. Some members left due to the pastor needing to have a family in line. Is that a right interpretation of Scripture? Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, in other words, if he would have governed his family appropriately, he would have not had a daughter get pregnant out of wedlock. Yeah. Um, most of we've had similar type situations, not necessarily that, but the Scripture talks about to be an elder or a pastor or something like that of a church, you have to be able to govern your family accordingly. So your wife can't be someone who's a troublemaker or whatever. You would have to step down. Sons and daughters, things like that. You can, that's the basic rule. In the United States, though, it's a little different because you can discipline your family until like your kids are 16 or whatever the state is, like 16 and a half, I think is Kansas. And then they're pretty much on their own. You can't really do much with them. But whatever the state is, federally, it's like 18. So 18 is the max. So when they're 18 years old, if they're not doing what they're supposed to, you can say, there's the door, leave. That sometimes can even be a problem with the different laws that we have. So it's a really, really difficult thing. One of my old pastors said in a situation like that, if he would have been doing what he was supposed to, it would have never happened. Same thing with marriages. If some people would say you got divorced because she had an affair. He didn't, but she did. So it's legitimate. And he would say, well, if you were a husband the way you should have been a husband, she wouldn't have had the affair. So it kind of all comes back on the father, the husband, in that sense. But it all depends on how those things happen. And so we don't know how she got pregnant, if it was a rape or if it was something else. And the laws are really messed up. If you get a girl pregnant that's under 18, it's supposed to be statutory rape and 5 years in prison. So whether it was she consented or not, because she's not a legal adult, she doesn't have the understanding to understand what's going to happen if she gets pregnant. She's not prepared for it. So she may think she knows, but she doesn't. And so that's the way the laws used to be, but those are not really being enforced either. So it's a very strange situation. The Dead Sea Scrolls talk about that kind of stuff in general. They're talking about if you're living amongst unbelievers and you have sons and daughters and they grow up, they're going to pick somebody and get married. And if they're unbelievers, there's a good chance that your grandkids are going to be raised as unbelievers. And you may not be able to do anything about it, which means your grandkids are going to die and go to hell. You could, however, pick up and move somewhere where there are only believers. And then your son or daughter will fall in love with the cute person over there that happens to be, one of us. And they talk about stuff like that. And then also out in a commune or something by yourself, or in a community with other believers like that, where you have your herbal medicine and your other stuff, was necessary towards the end of the last age for the Essenes. And they predicted that it might be necessary for us. I mean, just right now, think of all the, if you could have went somewhere out in the country, grown your own food, and ate non-GMO stuff, not got certain medications, and lived healthily, a lot of the problems you're having now wouldn't even exist. And so that's kind of what the Essenes are saying. If you don't want the problems with your kids, move so your kids won't get those problems. If you don't want health problems, move somewhere where you don't eat that kind of food and you don't have those problems. Now, it may not even be possible anymore in the United States as far as the food part. So it's just what, and then some states are getting involved saying you can't do that with your kids, even though your kids are minors. If somebody decides they need a gender fluid surgery or something like that, then you have to let all that stuff got way out of hand. And I'm sure that and other things will also get out of hand too. So it's just the evil of the generation we're living in that's going to cause a lot of problems. So yeah, with that kind of a thing, I think you'd have to look at that individually and see what kind of pastor he was, and what actually happened to the daughter and what the circumstances were. I think it's much like a divorce. If somebody had had a divorce, well, why? Did the spouse do something totally weird, or are you just overstepping your bounds? Each one of those would have to be looked at individually, I think. It's a good question, though. We do need to be more moral, and I think at the very least, having the leadership say, we need to sit down and think about this, whether they actually, fire the pastor or not. The fact that they're actually looking at it, I think, is good, because in a lot of churches, they wouldn't give it a second thought. And that's how we have all the other problems. So I think last question here. If Leviathan represents the one world government in Revelation to be destroyed, what does Behemoth represent? And is there a time when it is defeated? Yeah, I think there's a lot of Leviathan there was a question a while ago on the Talmud. In the Talmud, Leviathan is a 7-headed red dragon that represents an evil empire at the end of days. And that's basically all they say about it. So it's really interesting. A Leviathan is a sea serpent, a multi-headed sea serpent. It's a tannin. Leviathan or Leviathan is a tannin, or a sea serpent with 7 heads. And then the behemoth is a land animal, very huge, like you think like of a dinosaur or something, but a large land animal. And then there's also, and these are actually all mentioned in Scripture, there's also a ziz. And a ziz is the extremely large air animal. So it's a bird, like an eagle. And so it's interesting to me that you see, like in this with the three-headed eagle, and in the seventh vision of Daniel, the the three-headed eagle also. And then in Revelation, you have the dragon appeared in heaven. And then there's a Leviathan, or a Leviathan, and a behemoth. Excuse me. So it seems like the Leviathan represents the revived Roman Empire. We've got multiple scriptures and church fathers that talk about that. Seems like that's a consensus. Behemoth is the false prophet. And if you look at it as Gentile nations coming against Israel, and Behemoth is there on the land, it seems like the false prophet might be in Israel. I don't know that, but that's a couple of church fathers speculated on that. Nobody seems to be for sure. But then you've got the air creature also. So really interesting mix of some of the legends. But basically in Revelation, I see the Antichrist with the empire as Leviathan, and the behemoth, or the land beast, is the false prophet. So, okay. That's all of our questions for today. All right, well, we will be back next week. We'll continue this study, and hopefully in a few weeks, we'll have some interesting scrolls to talk to you about. It's amazing the kind of things that are coming out, and multiple people are working on these. So it'll be really, really interesting. So we'll go ahead and say good night, and we'll be back next Monday. Thank you, guys. God bless, and we'll see you later.